The lights blazed down on the packed auditorium as Condoleezza Rice stepped to the microphone, her face twisted with anger that nobody saw coming. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. The former Secretary of State was about to have a complete meltdown on live television, shouting at one of her own party members in front of thousands of people. But this wasn't just any random outburst. This was the culmination of months of behind-the-scenes tension that had been building like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Rice had been under intense scrutiny lately, with her approval ratings dropping and criticism mounting from all sides. The stress was clearly getting to her, and everyone was about to see just how much. Jonathan Roumie stood just 20 feet away, calm as ice, waiting for the storm to hit. He had no idea that his quiet, measured response would not only silence Rice, but create one of the most viral political moments of the year. The crowd held its breath as Rice raised her voice to a level that made everyone uncomfortable. What made this moment even more shocking was the setting. This was supposed to be a friendly, collaborative event where Democrats came together to show unity. Instead, it was about to become a battleground where one man's career would be launched while another's would be seriously damaged. "You think you know better than me?" Rice shouted, her voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "You're nothing but a freshman representative who doesn't understand how this game works." But what Roumie said next would change everything. His response was so calm, so perfectly delivered, that it left Rice speechless and sent the crowd into a frenzy. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was about to become a defining moment that would reshape how America saw both of these figures. What nobody in that auditorium knew was that this confrontation had been brewing for months. Rice had been making private comments about Roumie to other Democratic leaders, calling him too ambitious for his own good and suggesting that he needed to learn his place in the party hierarchy. Word of these comments had gotten back to Roumie, but he had chosen to take the high road and focus on his work rather than respond to the personal attacks. The irony was that Rice's behavior was exactly what voters were tired of seeing from their politicians. While Roumie represented a new generation of leaders who focused on policy and serving their constituents, Rice represented the old guard of politicians who seemed more concerned with protecting their own power and status than actually getting things done. This moment was about to expose that difference in the most dramatic way possible in front of thousands of witnesses and millions of viewers who would see the footage online within hours. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the most shocking political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see every second of what happens next, because this confrontation will leave you speechless. Now let's see exactly what happened when Condoleezza Rice lost control and how Jonathan Roumie's brilliant response stunned everyone watching. To understand why this confrontation was so shocking, you need to know who these two individuals are and why this moment mattered so much. Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, had built her career on being tough, calculated, and always in control. From her days as a professor to her time in the Bush administration, she was known for her sharp questioning and ability to stay cool under pressure. But lately, things had been different. Polls were dropping, criticism was mounting, and the pressure was getting to her. On the other side stood Jonathan Roumie, the actor and public figure who had quickly made a name for himself as someone who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. At just 48 years old, he had already become one of the most respected voices among younger progressive leaders. He was smart, articulate, and had a way of staying calm even when others around him were losing their minds. The setting was the annual Political Leadership Conference, where party leaders gathered to discuss strategy and present a united front. This was supposed to be a routine event, a chance for Democrats to show they were working together. Instead, it was about to become the stage for one of the most embarrassing public meltdowns in recent political history. The tension had been building for weeks. Rice had been pushing a controversial strategy that many younger Democrats, including Roumie, thought was a mistake. The strategy involved compromising on key progressive issues to appeal to moderate voters, something that Roumie and other younger party members saw as abandoning the values that got them elected. Behind closed doors, there had been heated discussions with Roumie respectfully but firmly opposing Rice's approach. What made things worse was that Roumie's opposition wasn't just philosophical. He had data to back up his position. Polling from his district and others showed that voters actually wanted Democrats to be more progressive, not less. When he presented this information in private meetings, Rice had dismissed it, saying that Roumie didn't understand real politics and was too inexperienced to grasp the bigger picture. The personal animosity had grown when Roumie's policy proposals started gaining support from other party members. Rice saw this as a direct challenge to her authority and had been making increasingly hostile comments about inexperienced newcomers who think they know better. Several political leaders had tried to mediate between them, but Rice refused to engage in any meaningful dialogue. What made the situation even more volatile was that Roumie had been gaining national attention for his smart, articulate responses to political attacks during interviews. Media outlets had started calling him the future of the Democratic Party, which only seemed to infuriate Rice more. Sources close to Rice said she felt threatened by the younger man's rising star and had been looking for an opportunity to put him in his place. The irony was that Roumie had always been respectful toward Rice, even when they disagreed. He had tried multiple times to arrange private meetings to discuss their differences, but Rice had refused. Instead, Rice had chosen to make their conflict public, apparently believing that her experience and position would give her an advantage in any confrontation. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The auditorium was packed with over 2,000 political leaders, activists, and media representatives. Cameras were rolling, social media was watching, and everyone expected to see party unity. Instead, they were about to witness something that would dominate headlines for weeks and change how people viewed both figures forever. Major networks had sent their top political correspondents, and the event was being live-streamed to thousands of viewers online. Every major political blog and news website would be covering this event, making the stakes incredibly high for both figures. Nobody in that room could have predicted that they were about to witness a moment that would fundamentally change the trajectory of American politics and create one of the most analyzed political confrontations in recent memory. As Condoleezza Rice took the stage for what was supposed to be a collaborative discussion about the party's future, something was clearly wrong. Her usual composed demeanor was nowhere to be found. Her hands were shaking slightly, her jaw was clenched, and there was a look in her eyes that suggested she was about to explode. People who knew Rice well later said they had never seen her like this before. Even during her most heated Senate confirmation hearings or intense moments of her career, she had always maintained a level of professional composure. But something about this situation, about having to share the stage with Jonathan Roumie, seemed to have triggered something in her that she couldn't control. The stage setup itself seemed to amplify the tension. Both were seated at a long table, but instead of the usual collaborative arrangement where politicians sit next to each other, they were positioned at opposite ends. The distance between them seemed to emphasize the growing divide, and the bright stage lights created a stark, almost confrontational atmosphere. Behind the scenes, Rice's staff had been worried about this appearance for days. Some had even suggested that she skip the event or find a way to avoid being on the same panel as Roumie. But Rice had insisted on going through with it, apparently believing that she could use the opportunity to establish her dominance over the younger figure. That decision was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. The first sign that something was wrong came when Rice began her opening remarks. Instead of the usual polished presentation everyone expected, her voice had an edge to it that immediately put the audience on alert. She started talking about loyalty and understanding your place in ways that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some people here think they can just show up and start making demands, Rice said, her voice getting louder with each word. They think because they won one election, they know how to run the country. The camera panned to Jonathan Roumie, who was sitting in the front row, his expression calm but alert. He clearly knew Rice was talking about him, but he didn't react. He just sat there, hands folded, watching Rice with the kind of steady gaze that suggested he was ready for whatever was coming. Rice continued, "There are people here who need to learn that there's a difference between being confident and being arrogant. There's a difference between having good ideas and thinking you know everything." The audience was getting uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of speech anyone expected at a unity conference. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd. Some people were looking at their phones, probably wondering if they should be recording this. Others were looking at Roumie, trying to gauge his reaction. That's when things took a dramatic turn. Rice paused in her speech, looked directly at Roumie, and said, "Some people need to remember that respect is earned, not given, and some people haven't earned anything yet." The auditorium went dead silent. Everyone knew this had just become personal. Roumie slowly stood up from his seat, his movements deliberate and calm. He walked toward the stage with the kind of confidence that suggested he had been expecting this moment and was ready for it. As Roumie approached the microphone that had been set up for the Q&A portion, Rice's demeanor changed completely. The controlled anger she had been displaying suddenly erupted into something much more raw and desperate. It was as if seeing Roumie calmly walking toward the stage triggered something in Rice that she couldn't control. "Don't you dare," Rice said, her voice now clearly audible through the main microphone. "Don't you dare think you can just walk up here." But Roumie kept walking. He reached the microphone, adjusted it to his height, and waited. The entire auditorium was holding its breath. Camera phones were coming out everywhere. This was clearly about to become a moment that would be replayed thousands of times on social media. Rice was now visibly shaking. Whatever composure she had left was completely gone. The former Secretary of State was about to have a complete public breakdown, and everyone in the room could see it coming. The cameras were capturing every moment of this. Professional photographers in the media section were snapping pictures of Rice's increasingly agitated state, while audience members discreetly pulled out their phones. Everyone seemed to sense that they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. What made the situation even more dramatic was the contrast between the two figures. Rice looked increasingly unhinged, her hair slightly disheveled from her animated gestures, her voice getting higher and more strained with each word. Meanwhile, Roumie remained perfectly composed, his posture straight, his expression calm but alert. Some people in the audience later said they could literally feel the tension in the room, like electricity before a thunderstorm. The air seemed thick with anticipation as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "You want to say something?" Rice shouted, her voice now carrying throughout the entire auditorium without even needing the microphone. "You think you have something important to add? Well, let me tell you something about importance." The crowd was stunned. Some people were covering their mouths in shock. Others were frantically typing on their phones. This was not normal behavior for any politician, let alone a former Secretary of State. But Rice wasn't done. She was just getting started. And what came next would be even worse. What made this moment so shocking was not just what Rice was saying, but how she was saying it. Her voice had taken on a shrill quality that seemed to echo through the auditorium in an uncomfortable way. Her facial expressions were becoming increasingly distorted with anger, and she was gesturing wildly as if she was losing control of her own body language. The professional cameras that were recording the event for later broadcasts were capturing every moment of this breakdown. The camera operators, who had probably filmed hundreds of political events, seemed unsure of how to frame what they were seeing. Do you focus on Rice as she loses control? Do you show Roumie's calm reaction? Do you pan to the shocked audience? In the end, they captured it all, creating a visual record of one of the most unprofessional displays ever seen from a political figure. Meanwhile, Roumie remained perfectly still. He didn't fidget. He didn't look around nervously. He didn't try to interrupt or defend himself. He simply stood there with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to hide. His composure was so striking that even some of Rice's supporters in the audience began to feel uncomfortable about what their chosen leader was doing. This wasn't politics. This was bullying, and it was happening on a national stage. What happened next will be remembered as one of the most shocking moments in modern political history. Rice completely lost control, and her next words sent shockwaves through the entire auditorium. "You think you know better than me," Condoleezza Rice screamed, her voice now so loud that people in the back rows could hear every word clearly. "You're nothing. You're a nobody who got lucky and won an election. You don't know anything about real leadership." The crowd gasped audibly. Some people actually stood up from their seats in shock. This was a former Secretary of State screaming at a fellow politician in front of thousands of people and rolling cameras. It was political suicide happening in real time. But Rice wasn't finished. She pointed directly at Jonathan Roumie and continued yelling, "I've been fighting for this party since before you even knew what politics was. I was a professor when you were still figuring out what you wanted to do with your life. And you think you can just waltz in here and tell me how things should be done?" The entire auditorium was in complete shock. Some people were looking around as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Others had their phones out, clearly recording what was happening. This was going to be everywhere within minutes. Roumie stood at the microphone, completely calm. He waited for Rice to finish her tirade, showing no emotion whatsoever. When Rice finally paused to catch her breath, Roumie spoke into the microphone, and his voice was so calm and controlled that it created an immediate contrast that everyone in the room felt. "Madame Secretary," Roumie said, his voice steady and respectful, "I think you might want to sit down and take a breath." The simplicity of his response sent a wave of surprise through the crowd. After all that screaming and personal attacks, Roumie's calm, almost fatherly response made Rice look completely unhinged by comparison. But Rice wasn't done. "Don't tell me to sit down," she screamed even louder. "I don't take orders from you. You work for me. This whole party works for me." That's when Roumie delivered the response that would make this moment legendary. He leaned into the microphone and in the same calm, measured tone, he said, "Madam Secretary, with all due respect, nobody works for you. We all work for the American people. And right now, the American people are watching you have a breakdown on national television because you can't handle the fact that someone disagrees with you." The auditorium erupted, not in cheers or boos, but in that kind of shocked murmur that happens when everyone realizes they've just witnessed something historic. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Rice, red-faced and screaming, looked completely out of control. Roumie, calm and composed, looked like the only adult in the room. People in the audience were literally turning to each other with expressions of disbelief. Some were shaking their heads. Others were covering their mouths in shock. A few people had actually started to stand up as if they were thinking about leaving because the situation had become so uncomfortable. The media section was in a frenzy of activity. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones and laptops, trying to capture every detail of what was happening. Camera operators were zooming in on both figures' faces, knowing that these images would be seen by millions of people within hours. What made Roumie's response even more powerful was the way he delivered it. He didn't rush to fill the silence after Rice's outburst. Instead, he let the former Secretary of State's words hang in the air for a moment, allowing everyone to process what they had just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear, creating an immediate contrast that everyone in the room could feel. Roumie continued, "I came here today to have a respectful discussion about our country's future. But if you'd rather yell at me than actually engage with the ideas I brought, that says more about your leadership than it does about mine." Rice tried to respond, but she was so angry that her words came out as incoherent, shouting, "You don't, you can't, this is not how I am the Secretary of State." The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. This was no longer the calculated anger she had started with. This was pure panic. She seemed to realize that she was losing control of the situation. But instead of trying to regain her composure, she doubled down on the behavior that was destroying her credibility. Some people in the audience were now visibly cringing. A few had actually covered their eyes as if they couldn't bear to watch what was happening. The secondhand embarrassment was palpable throughout the auditorium. What made it even worse was that Rice kept repeating, "I am the Secretary of State," as if her title alone should be enough to win the argument. But titles mean nothing when your behavior undermines everything the title is supposed to represent. Roumie had just demonstrated more presidential qualities in 5 minutes than Rice had shown throughout the entire confrontation. Roumie nodded respectfully and said, "Yes, you are. And that's exactly why this behavior is so concerning. The American people deserve better than this." The crowd was now completely silent, except for the sound of phone cameras recording. Everyone understood that they were witnessing a career-defining moment, but not in the way Rice had probably hoped. Rice made one final attempt to regain control. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just embarrass me in front of all these people?" Roumie's response was perfect. "Madame Secretary, I'm not embarrassing you. You're embarrassing yourself. And more importantly, you're embarrassing our country. I'm going to return to my seat now, and I hope you'll take some time to think about whether this is really how you want to represent the office you hold." But before Roumie could step away from the microphone, Rice made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "You don't understand the pressures of real leadership," she shouted. "You've never had to make the hard choices. You've never had the weight of an entire nation on your shoulders." Roumie stopped and turned back to the microphone. His final response would become the most quoted line from the entire confrontation. "Madam Secretary, real leadership isn't about the weight you carry. It's about how you carry that weight. And right now, you're showing everyone in this room that you can't handle pressure without lashing out at the people you're supposed to be working with." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Rice seemed to realize that she had been completely outmatched. Her face went pale as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. And with that, Roumie calmly walked back to his seat, leaving Rice standing alone on the stage, still visibly shaking with anger. The entire auditorium watched in stunned silence as the former Secretary of State had been completely outclassed by a public figure who never raised his voice or showed any disrespect. The moderator quickly took the microphone and called for a recess, but the damage was done. In less than 10 minutes, Rice had destroyed her credibility And Jonathan Roumie had shown the kind of leadership that people had been hoping to see from their elected officials. The immediate aftermath was unlike anything anyone in that auditorium had ever seen. As soon as the moderator called for a recess, the room exploded into activity. People were on their phones, cameras were flashing, and everyone was talking at once. But what happened in the next few hours would prove that this moment was about to have consequences far beyond that auditorium. Within minutes, videos of the confrontation were spreading across social media faster than anyone could track. The hashtag was trending within an hour, with thousands of people sharing clips of Roumie's composed responses to Rice's screaming. But it wasn't just the calm that people were talking about. It was the substance of what he said and how he said it. The viral spread was unprecedented. Political moments usually take hours or even days to gain traction on social media, but this was different. The contrast between the two figures was so stark, and the moment so shocking that people couldn't help but share it immediately. One of the most shared videos was a side-by-side comparison that someone had created, showing Rice screaming while Roumie remained completely calm. The visual impact was devastating for Rice and incredible for Roumie. Within 3 hours, that single video had been viewed over 2 million times. Another viral moment was when someone isolated audio of Rice's voice getting progressively higher and more strained throughout the confrontation. Contrasted with Roumie's consistently steady tone, the audio clip became a meme, with people using it to illustrate the difference between losing control and maintaining composure under pressure. One of the most viral clips was Roumie's line about working for the American people, not for Rice. The video had been shared over 100,000 times in the first 2 hours, with comments praising his professionalism and leadership. "This is what real leadership looks like," wrote one user. He stayed calm while the former Secretary of State had a complete meltdown. But the clips of Rice were going viral for all the wrong reasons. The video of her screaming, "You're nothing, you're a nobody," was being shared with comments expressing shock and disappointment. "This is our former Secretary of State," wrote one user. "How embarrassing." The most damaging clip was a compilation that someone had created, showing Rice's face getting progressively redder and more distorted throughout the confrontation. The video, set to dramatic music, had been viewed over 500,000 times in the first 6 hours and was being shared with comments like, "This is what a complete meltdown looks like, and she's lost it completely." Another viral moment came from an unexpected source, a lip reader who analyzed the footage and claimed to have identified several additional insults that Rice had muttered under her breath, but that weren't picked up by the microphones. Whether or not the lip reading was accurate, the video of the analysis got over 300,000 views and added another layer of controversy to an already explosive situation. The meme started almost immediately. Someone created a side-by-side comparison of Rice screaming with a photo of a toddler having a tantrum, captioned, "Spot the difference." Another popular meme showed Roumie's calm face next to Rice's angry one with the caption, "When you're the adult in the room versus when you're not." Perhaps most damaging of all was a video compilation that someone created showing Rice's behavior at this event, contrasted with clips of her from previous appearances where she had criticized other politicians for losing their temper. The hypocrisy was stark and undeniable, and the video was shared thousands of times with comments pointing out the double standard. The contrast between the two figures couldn't have been more stark in the videos. Rice looked unhinged, unprofessional, and frankly unstable. Roumie looked calm, dignified, and presidential. The visual impact was devastating for Rice and incredible for Roumie. Within 6 hours, major news networks were running the story as their lead. The headlines were brutal for Rice. "Former Secretary of State melts down at political conference," read one headline. "Rice screams at fellow leader in shocking outburst, raising questions about stability." Meanwhile, the coverage of Roumie was overwhelmingly positive. "Rising star shows grace under pressure," one headline said. Roumie's calm response to Rice's tirade wins praise, demonstrating real leadership. Political analysts were already calling it a career-defining moment for both figures, but in completely opposite ways. For Rice, it was being described as potentially career-ending. For Roumie, it was being hailed as his arrival on the national stage as a serious political leader. The damage to Rice was immediate and severe. Within 24 hours, 3 major Democratic donors had publicly questioned her fitness for office. 2 prominent Democratic senators issued statements expressing concern about the former Secretary of State's behavior. Even some of Rice's own staff were reportedly telling colleagues they were embarrassed by what they had witnessed. But the response to Roumie was the exact opposite. Donations to his campaign fund increased by 400% in the first 48 hours after the confrontation. He gained over 200,000 new followers on social media. Most importantly, he started receiving calls from major political leaders asking him to take on larger roles in the party. The long-term implications became clear over the following weeks. Rice's approval ratings, which were already struggling, dropped by 15 points in the week following the incident. More damaging was the perception that she couldn't handle pressure or disagreement, which is fatal for any political leader. What made the damage even worse for Rice was that the incident had been captured from multiple angles. Professional cameras, phone videos, and even security footage all told the same story. The former Secretary of State had completely lost control, while Roumie, a political newcomer, had shown remarkable composure and leadership. The incident also created a split within the political party that hadn't existed before. Older, more established figures found themselves in the awkward position of having to defend Rice's behavior, while younger leaders rallied around Roumie as an example of the kind of leadership they wanted to see. Some political leaders tried to downplay the incident, calling it a misunderstanding or suggesting that both figures had simply been passionate about their beliefs. But these attempts at damage control only made things worse, as they were contradicted by the clear video evidence of what had actually happened. Meanwhile, Roumie's star continued to rise. He was invited to speak at major political events across the country. Party leaders who had never heard of him before were now seeking his input on major policy decisions. He had gone from a relatively unknown figure to one of the most respected voices in the party practically overnight. The incident also sparked a broader conversation about leadership and temperament in American politics. Many people pointed to Roumie's response as an example of the kind of calm, thoughtful leadership that the country needed. Jonathan Roumie's ability to remain respectful even while being screamed at resonated with voters who were tired of political drama and personal attacks. What made Roumie's performance even more impressive was that he had achieved something that many seasoned politicians struggle with. He had managed to look presidential while the former Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, looked completely unpresidential. Political science professors began using the incident as a teaching tool, showing students how body language, tone of voice, and word choice can completely change how the public perceives a political figure. The incident became a case study in political communication. Universities across the country began incorporating the footage into their curricula, using it to demonstrate the importance of maintaining composure under pressure. Communication experts analyzed every aspect of both figures' performances, from their posture to their facial expressions to their choice of words. One political psychology professor at a major university wrote a widely shared analysis of the incident, noting that Roumie had demonstrated textbook crisis communication, while Rice had shown a complete breakdown of emotional regulation that would be concerning in any leader, but is particularly troubling in someone holding such high office. The incident also became a favorite topic among body language experts who pointed out that Roumie's steady posture and calm facial expression had created a powerful contrast with Rice's increasingly erratic movements and expressions. In terms of nonverbal communication, wrote one expert, Roumie dominated this interaction completely. He projected strength and stability, while Rice projected chaos and insecurity. The incident also revealed something troubling about Rice's character that many people hadn't seen before. Her inability to handle disagreement, her tendency to personalize policy disputes, and her apparent belief that her position entitled her to automatic deference all raised serious questions about her fitness for higher office. Some political analysts suggested that this moment revealed the real Condoleezza Rice, someone who couldn't handle being challenged and who viewed politics as being about personal power rather than public service. Meanwhile, Roumie's handling of the situation demonstrated exactly the opposite qualities. His respect for the office, even while its occupant was disrespecting herself. His focus on serving the American people, rather than protecting his own ego, and the ability to remain calm under the most intense pressure showed the kind of character that voters were looking for in their leaders. 3 months later, when asked about the incident in an interview, Roumie remained characteristically gracious. "I have a lot of respect for the former Secretary of State and the office she holds," he said. "Everyone has bad days, and I hope we can all learn from that moment and move forward in a way that better serves the American people." Rice, on the other hand, never fully recovered from the incident. She issued a brief statement the next day, expressing regret for her tone, but she never directly apologized to Roumie or acknowledged the inappropriateness of her behavior. This only made the contrast between the two figures more apparent and damaged her reputation further. The incident also highlighted a generational divide within the political party. Younger politicians rallied around Roumie, seeing him as representing a new kind of leadership that was more focused on substance than personal drama. Older politicians found themselves having to defend Rice's behavior, which many found difficult to do convincingly. Political consultants began analyzing the incident as a case study in crisis management. Roumie's response was held up as a masterclass in how to handle an unexpected attack with grace and dignity. Rice's reaction became an example of how not to behave when faced with disagreement or criticism. The broader implications for American politics were significant. The incident showed that voters were hungry for leaders who could remain calm under pressure and focus on issues rather than personal attacks. It also demonstrated the power of social media to instantly amplify political moments and shape public perception. 6 months later, polling showed that Roumie had become one of the most popular political figures in the country with approval ratings that rivaled those of the most established party leaders. Rice, meanwhile, saw her political future increasingly questioned by party insiders and voters alike. The transformation in both figures' political fortunes was remarkable. Roumie went from being a relatively unknown figure to being mentioned as a potential future presidential candidate. Political betting markets began offering odds on him running for higher office, and major political donors started reaching out to his campaign team about potential future runs. Rice, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated within her own party. Several high-profile politicians began distancing themselves from her, and there were whispers that party leadership was considering whether she should remain on the ticket for the next election. The incident had damaged not just her personal reputation, but also raised questions about her political judgment and emotional stability. The contrast in their trajectories became even more stark when both figures appeared at subsequent political events. Roumie was consistently praised for his thoughtful responses and calm demeanor, while Rice struggled to regain the trust and respect she had lost. Every time she appeared in public, people inevitably compared her to that moment when she lost control, and the comparison was never favorable. The incident at the Democratic Leadership Conference had started as what should have been a routine political event. Instead, it became a defining moment that launched one political career while seriously damaging another. It showed the American people what real leadership looks like and what it doesn't look like. Most importantly, it proved that in politics, as in life, how you handle pressure and conflict says more about your character than anything else. Jonathan Roumie's calm, respectful response to an unprecedented attack didn't just win him that moment. It won him the respect and admiration of millions of Americans who were looking for exactly the kind of leadership he demonstrated. The lesson for viewers watching at home was clear. Real strength isn't about who can shout the loudest or who holds the highest title. Real strength is about maintaining your principles and your composure, even when someone is trying to destroy you in front of the entire world. Roumie had shown that kind of strength, while Rice had shown its complete opposite. The story also highlighted something important about modern American politics. Voters are hungry for authenticity and genuine leadership. They can tell the difference between someone who is performing for the cameras and someone who is genuinely trying to serve the public good. In this confrontation, it was crystal clear which person was which. As we continue to follow both of these figures' careers, one thing is clear. This moment changed everything. Rice's political future now looks uncertain at best. While Roumie has emerged as one of the most promising leaders in American politics, the contrast between their responses to pressure and conflict will be remembered for years to come, serving as a perfect example of what leadership should look like and what it shouldn't. And if you want to stay updated on how this story continues to develop and catch all the biggest political moments as they happen, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The political landscape is changing fast, and you won't want to miss what happens next in this incredible story of leadership, composure, and what it really means to serve the American people. Don't forget to like this video if you were as shocked as everyone else by what you just witnessed. And let us know in the comments what you think about these two very different approaches to political leadership.